Uyen xin trân trọng kính chào quý vị khán thính giả. Kính thưa quý vị, trong chương trình ngày hôm nay chúng tôi rất là hân hạnh xin được tiếp chuyện với một vị khách quý trở lại với chương trình. Đó là tác giả Viet Thanh Nguyen. Tác giả Viet Thanh Nguyen sinh ra tại Việt Nam và lớn lên tại Hoa Kỳ. Anh là tác giả của tiểu thuyết The Sympathizer, đã được trao giải Pulitzer cho loại truyện tưởng tượng, cũng như là giải Andrew Carnegie Medal cho tiểu thuyết tưởng tượng, cũng như là giải The Center for Fiction cho tiểu thuyết đầu tay, giải The Edgar Award và cho tiểu thuyết đầu tay, thưa quý vị, cũng như là giải văn chương Asian Pacific American Award, giải thưởng sách California Book Award cho tiểu thuyết tưởng tượng đầu tay và giải văn chương hòa bình Dayton, thưa quý vị. Tác phẩm mới nhất của anh với tựa đề The Refugees, tạm dịch là Những Người Tị Nạn, là một tập truyện bao gồm nhiều truyện ngắn được thực hiện trong 20 năm, kể những chuyện xảy ra tại cả Việt Nam lẫn Hoa Kỳ. Trong những câu chuyện này thì tác giả vẽ ra một hình ảnh rõ ràng về kinh nghiệm của những người sống giữa hai thế giới, một quê hương mới và một quê hương nơi họ ra đời. Viet Thanh Nguyen cũng là tác giả của tác phẩm Nothing Ever Dies vào chung kết giải thưởng sách quốc gia và tác phẩm Race and Resistance. Tác giả Viet Thanh Nguyen hiện là giáo sư Anh ngữ, Mỹ học và chủng tộc học tại Đại học University of Southern California, USC, và ông hiện đang sống tại Los Angeles. Chúng tôi cũng xin được mạn phép trong buổi nói chuyện ngày hôm nay thì xin được phỏng vấn tác giả bằng Anh ngữ, thưa quý vị. Và mong rằng là quý vị thông cảm cho cái buổi nói chuyện ngày hôm nay. Và trước hết thì tôi xin chào giáo sư Việt. Anh khỏe không?
Có khỏe. Chị có khỏe không?
Dạ vâng, tôi rất là khỏe. Cũng hơn 1 năm rồi đúng không giáo sư? Lần trước là giáo sư đến với đài là lúc đó vừa mới ra sách The Sympathizer. Thì cho tôi xin được bắt đầu cái buổi nói chuyện bằng tiếng Anh thì có thể nó dễ cho anh em mình hơn. Thì when we last spoke, your first novel, The Sympathizer, was just hitting bookshelves. And of course, since then, you know, I've been hearing your voice, seeing you all over, and really nice to see a really great review on the New York Times, not just once, but many times. So now you're a Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction. Big congratulations to you. Thì trong cái cuộc nói chuyện lần trước, thưa quý vị, thì tiểu thuyết đầu tay của tác giả Viet Nguyen, The Sympathizer, vừa mới được xuất bản sau khi được nhật báo The New York Times khen ngợi. Bây giờ anh là tác giả đã đoạt giải Pulitzer và chúng tôi xin chúc mừng đến anh Viet Nguyen. Xin anh cho biết là cái cảm tưởng. I'm assuming that you are the first Vietnamese writer to win this award, yes?
I think so, yeah.
Do you feel like you're now an official American writer, not just a Vietnamese writer winning an American award?
I think that's true. I think people do, the Pulitzer Prize gives you legitimacy, and it gets you read all over the world. So the book is being translated into many different languages, and I think people do see me as an American author, but as a Vietnamese author too. So it's both those identities at the same time.
What was your reaction when you heard that you won the Pulitzer Awards? Where were you, and what did you do at that moment, at that time?
I was on book tour. I was in a hotel room in Boston, and I was writing emails, which is what I usually do on book tour, and then all of a sudden Facebook and Twitter start making all kinds of noise, and I'd look and I think, oh, did this really happen? I was quite shocked. But yes, the shock was the reaction and surprise and gratitude.
Were you kind of aware that you will win this award prior to the announcement?
It's a complete surprise.
No, really?
Yeah, there's no nomination process, so you don't know in advance that you're being considered for this.
And did you know who was your competitor?
No.
No, so they didn't say anything?
Yeah, nothing. It was a very nice surprise.
So what did you do? How did you celebrate afterward?
I was alone in this hotel room. There was not much I could do. I was about to go to a bookstore to do a book reading in a few hours. So I asked my friends on Facebook, what should I do? They said play this song called Champagne by Neo. Oh. And that was actually the right song.
Perfect.
I danced
song.
by myself.
By yourself.
Yeah.
But I hope you did share this great news with your family.
I did. Actually, what happened was that my father found out about this not from me. I didn't tell him. I don't go home to tell my parents about these things.
Why?
So I think that you know, we're modest people. We don't go around bragging about the things that we do. And my dad actually called me 2 days later after I'd won the Pulitzer. I was in Philadelphia. He called me and he said, "Oh, the relatives in Vietnam called him, and said he won the Pulitzer." And my dad his voice was shaking with happiness. He was the happiest I'd ever heard him. And that made me happy, you know, and it surprised me that people in Vietnam cared about this.
It's interesting that people in Vietnam call your father to, you know, share the great news, while his own son was too afraid to share this great news because he doesn't want his dad to think that he's bragging about his own success.
Yeah. Is that very Vietnamese?
I don't know.
It's very much like my family.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, so what do you guys do when you get together? Do you talk about your work, or do you talk about other things that not relate to your work?
Usually we don't talk about work. We talk about family, we talk about the children, we talk about my parents' health, these kinds of things, but we hardly ever talk about what I do or what my brother does.
So, you know, I just did a brief introduction of your latest book, The Refugees, and it took you almost 20 years to complete the short stories. Why so long?
Well, I began the story collection in 1997 and finished the last story in 2014, 17 years, and it took 3 years to get it published. And I think the reason it took so long is that I learned how to write through writing these short stories. I didn't go to school for writing. And so it was really a period of experimentation, of trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. And these stories are about Vietnamese refugees and the people who know them. So it was also difficult just to try to figure out what stories I should be telling and how to shape them in a way that would make dramatic sense. And all in all, it was a very, very challenging experience, but I'm glad I went through it.
Em mới nhận được cuốn sách đầu tiên của anh mới gửi, thì em có cơ hội em đọc được cũng một vài trang cho cái chapter một đầu tiên. Thì as I was reading this first chapter, em thắc mắc đó là những cái câu chuyện này anh có hỏi mẹ anh, hay là mẹ anh lớn lên mẹ anh có kể những cái câu chuyện này cho anh hay không, hay là đây là anh nghe từ bạn bè hay là từ gia đình kể những cái mẫu chuyện này. Đây chapter 1, Black Eyed Women. Anh có thể chia sẻ là cái backstory của cái chapter 1 này?
Well, the story in Black Eyed Women is about a writer, and one night someone knocks on her door, and it's the ghost of her dead brother, who, like her, was a boat refugee, but he didn't make it, he didn't survive. And many, many years later, he finally has swam across the Pacific Ocean and arrived at her door. So this story was purely imagination. I didn't hear about it from anybody, but I certainly have heard about ghost stories from Vietnamese people. Right? This idea that the dead will come and visit you to say goodbye. And I wanted to write a story about that. I wanted to write a ghost story that was not about horrible ghosts or scary ghosts, but about benevolent ghosts who will do everything they can to see their loved ones before they finally make their last journey.
Very interesting, because as I was reading chapter 1, I can relate to some of the parts in your first chapter, Black Eyed Women. It reminded me, I kind of heard about this part growing up in my family. And did you think that in our culture, trong cái văn hóa của người Việt Nam mình, is it common, nó rất là bình thường khi mình nghe những cái câu chuyện ma từ bố mẹ hay là trong gia đình chia sẻ, thí dụ người này qua đời rồi cái linh hồn người đó chưa được thoát nên họ muốn về, họ nhắn một cái message gì đó cho mình. Anh có nghĩ cái đó là nó rất là bình thường trong cái văn hóa của người Việt Nam mình hay không?
I think it is, you know, because people don't seem surprised or shocked by these kinds of stories, and most people have heard about these kinds of visitations, and some people claim that they have been visited by ghosts like that. And so I think that for Vietnamese people, many of them really do believe ghosts exist, and so do Americans. Americans believe ghosts and angels exist too, and as long as people believe it, then they're real. And that's partially what the story is about. The story makes it very literal, that this ghost really does appear. And the writer who meets her brother as a ghost is, of course, frightened a little bit, but she gets over it because she realizes he doesn't mean her any harm.
Do you believe in ghosts? Have you ever seen a spirit?
I don't think so.
Would you be ready if you see spirit around you? How would you react?
It depends if it's a friendly spirit or not. And no, I think I'm actually quite scared of ghosts. Yeah.
Nếu mà anh sợ ma thì tại sao anh có thể imagine viết một cái câu chuyện đầu tiên?
Well, it's interesting because I don't like ghost stories and I don't watch them, and so I had to write the story mostly from my imagination without having a lot of inspiration to draw from. But I think the reason I did it is because I think writers have to challenge themselves and to try different things. And for me, each of these stories, or 8 stories, even though they're all about Vietnamese people, they're about very different kinds of Vietnamese people. Just because we're Vietnamese doesn't mean we're the same. So I try to get into as many different backgrounds and different characters as I could, different kinds of genres. And so the ghost story, simply because it's so important to Vietnamese culture, is something that I wanted to try.
And speaking of challenge, what was the most difficult part for you to write Chapter 1, Black Eyed Women?
That story began in 1997 and ended in 2014. It took me over 50 drafts, and it was a very difficult, terrible, painful experience to write the story.
Tại sao nó lâu vậy anh? Tới 50 cái drafts khác nhau.
Yeah, and I think the reason why is because with short stories, I'm not a natural short story writer. I'm a natural novelist. When I wrote The Sympathizer, it was relatively easy for me. I wrote it in 2 years and only took a few drafts. Because I have a lot to say, and the novel is a very big form that I can use that in that way. But short stories are very small, and you have to be, as a writer, be able to tell more with less, and that's not my natural talent. So it took 50 drafts because I had to learn how to take things out of the story that didn't belong there.
It was painful for you, I assume.
Painful.
Yeah.
Very, very painful. Yes.
Wow.
But again, it taught me how to be a writer. So for that, I'm grateful. Yeah.
Wow. Dạ vâng, thưa quý vị, xin quý vị khán thính giả vẫn tiếp tục giữ màn hình SBTN. Chúng tôi sẽ trở lại trong giây lát.